Rabies and Germs, welcome to the Mishmash Podcast. My name's McConnaughay, I'm here alongside Scott Moore, and for today's video, he and I will be sitting down to discuss the 1986 science fiction classic, The Fly, directed by David Cronenberg. How we generally do a lot of our videos, if not chosen simply because mutual interest, is by taking turns. I chose to talk about The Fly, and for our next video, we'll be discussing his choice of the Monster Calls novel. For those that don't know, The Fly is a horror film about a scientist that has made the scientific discovery of how to teleport someone from one place to the other. Unfortunately, something goes very wrong when he accidentally teleports himself and a common housefly, confusing the machine and making it merge the two of them together.
My thoughts of the film were immensely positive when I first watched it. I really enjoyed the approach. I think at this time, whenever I first watched it, I was going on this binge of 1980s horror films. Usually whenever you do that, I find myself watching Friday the 13th and films of that ilk. And because I do that, they have bad quality. And so finding this one meant a lot more to me because I had just went through all these bad films. So finding a film that actually delivered in some capacity really meant a lot.
I'm going to be honest with you. Whenever I first started watching this movie, I was thinking it was going to be a cheesy, cultish flick.
And there's definitely some parts in there that are cheesy. There's two parts in this movie that always drove me insane. There are two parts that happen about the exact same point. When he first becomes, goes to the time machine, they're trying to make it seem like he's fly-like, and he goes up and on that one thing and just, runs up onto the ceiling, when he's doing the chin-up.
Right.
And those parts just struck me as really, really cheesy. I'm that's not what a fly does.
What was even funnier was the way she reacted to it. She was sitting there in the chair, I remember, and she's just watching him in, awe. This is the coolest thing that's ever happened, and it's not weird at all that he's just over there not saying a word to her. And all of a sudden, he's a gymnast. And, that was very weird. And yes, that has nothing to do with a fly. The superhuman strength is one of the first things I noticed. Another cheesy part, just going off the cheesiness, was whenever she first came in and he's discovering and, I guess, accepting the disease. And he's like, hey, I'm getting pretty good at this. And he's, on the ceiling, and he's coming down and just sitting there staring at her.
That's funny. That's how...
it's very cheesy, very different. So like I said, whenever I first started watching it, I expected it to be all cheesy and nothing positive to come out of it. It's not secret between us that I'm not a huge fan of horror, so whenever I went in there, I didn't go in with generally positive outlook on it. I thought I was going to watch it, it was going to be blah, and then I was going to move on, probably just decimate it inside this podcast, and actually I was pleasantly surprised. I didn't hate it. There was a lot of moments where I would have said, okay, that doesn't make any sense, or probably not the way I would have went about it if I was writing the movie. But overall, generally, I would probably give it a pretty positive review. I didn't think that it was horrible. I was able to watch it. Normally, it takes forever to watch movies, but this one I was able to watch in a setting, and so I was very proud of that, and... So I had a generally positive review of everything. Before watching the movie, I know that you said this version of it wasn't associated with the short story, but the DVD copy that I had.
It included the short story. I didn't... I've had that DVD for a long time. I never noticed that.
It was actually on disc, too. So whenever I opened the disc up, there was two of them, and... For some reason, the first disc says something about director's commentary. And then the second disc is all of this other stuff on it. And I was like, well, I don't want to watch the director's commentary. And so I put in the second disc thinking that's where the main movie was going to be. Well, I found all this other stuff. There was the original screenplay, the original movie from 1958, the original short story. So I was like, you know what? I've never read a short story on my TV before. So I just went ahead and clicked on it, and I started to read it. And that's probably, one of the reasons, you got tired. I'm sitting there watching a book on my TV. It's kind of hard to follow, but I did. I read it all. Quick one setting. It was an easy read. It wasn't very long. Have you read it?
I haven't read it, actually. Because I knew it was so different. I realized that with the 1986 film that Cronenberg did, he basically took the 1958 film and used it as a template for what he wanted to do, and then basically went in a completely different direction with it. So I'd never really gotten around to reading it.
So, there's similarities and there's dissimilarities. As you take any adaptation, the dissimilarities are, of course, a whole lot more prevalent. Just a quick synopsis of the short story to kind of get an idea of what you would be comparing it to is it starts out with a man who is talking about hating the telephone. It's a brand new invention, so we're thinking more of a 1800s vibe as opposed to maybe like when cars and telephones first just came out, as opposed to the modern era that this film is set in. But he's talking about being scared of the telephone, and all of a sudden the telephone is ringing, and his sister-in-law is on the other line. She is confessing that she just killed her husband, which happens to be the protagonist here, his brother. And she tells him that she wants him to come over to comfort her because she's distressed. Well, he calls the constable, and they go down there and to his factory, and they see that his brother was smashed under a press in his factory. Well, he had lent his brother a small room inside the laboratory, or inside the factory for a laboratory, to do experiments for a company called Air. In the movie, I think they're called Brunswick. So that is totally different. Whenever he goes back into it, the woman she gets put in an insane asylum. She clearly did it. She admits to doing it, but she won't tell anybody why. So there for a little while, it's the question of why. He also has a son in the short story, and the son comes and goes, but he's with the brother. And so whenever she's ready to confess, she gives an envelope to the brother and says, "Hey, I know that you guys were going to get close, so I wrote down everything." Well, he goes home and he starts to read it, and he finds out that what happened first is that he started doing all these experiments on inanimate objects. He started with an ashtray. Well, the ashtray came out, and the made in Japan, was backwards when it came out. That was the only thing that was wrong with the inanimate
So
object.
you can kind of make a comparison to that and the monkey, the chimpanzee that was put into the machine in the Fly movie came out inside out, or
Right. So actually, in the story and in the movie both, the inanimate object thing is a thing, because he says that he can't do any life forms, organic life forms, and that all he could do is the inanimate objects. Well, that's how it starts too in the short story. But then he actually does animals in the short story. First, he tries to do a cat. The cat doesn't even come back. It disappears into particle space. Then he does a couple more animals, and none of them are chimpanzees, which I also found weird in the story or in the movie, because you would think that a baboon would be much less cost effective than just say a cat.
Yeah, maybe.
So I was wondering why they went that route.
Maybe he was trying to get it. I'm not necessarily saying this was but from a kind of say maybe he wanted something that was closer to human, because that was the intended purpose for what he wanted to transfer. Most predominantly, he thought maybe that'd be more similar to a cat, or more similar to a human than what a cat is. I mean, that's probably not their intended purpose. I'm just saying, you could cheat and say that.
That is possible. He goes on to, of course, transport himself. He tells his wife that he's going to transport himself. She comes down, and he's on the typewriter. She's really scared whenever she finds out that he's not even half fly in this. He's got a fly head and a fly arm.
Which is actually what they did in the 1958 movie, because I remember the cover work, and it was the fly, and it's his head.
Yes. So what happens is he can't change himself, and he ends up going back through it one more time to appease her, and he actually gets a cat nose because he finds the cat inside the particle space, and now he has a fly head with a cat nose. And then she kills him. And so the brother ends up finding the other fly. It's because the fly got away. They didn't fuse in the story, so the fly got away, and it had a white head, which would have been the human head.
Yeah.
Well, he ends up finding it caught in a cobweb, and he crushes it, puts it in a matchbox, and goes and buries it with his brother. I mean, so there is a whole lot of dissimilarities.
Because I feel like Cronenberg really did something new with it, and I think that's why I've always kind of ignored the 1958 movie, and I guess the same reason I ignored the short story is because it always came off very Universal monster kind of approach, like how they would do those movies. Whereas I feel like this movie had more substance to it. There's two scenes in particular I absolutely loved from this film, and I wanted to single out. In general, I like the end a lot. The monster that he has become is crawling toward her, and he brings the gun up, and basically asking her to kill him. I thought that was a really, really powerful scene. but also my favorite scene of the entire film, and like you said, as you were watching it, you thought it was going to be a cheesy science fiction kind of film. I felt similar in that regard, but there was one scene in particular whenever he was starting his transition, and he was basically just about losing himself. He gave a speech to the girl asking her to leave a little bit after she announced that she was pregnant to him.
Sure, the politician's
speech. Yeah, have you ever heard of insect politics, and how insects aren't politics? They don't have that kind of compassion, that thought process, and if you don't leave from this area, I'm going to hurt you. And for some reason, that scene always, resonated with me because it brought it, in my opinion, over just being a fun science fiction monster kind of movie. And I thought that there was actually some emotional substance there because you could feel that character's pain and how he was slowly changing and there was nothing he could do about it, which is something I don't feel like they've captured in a lot of other monster movies.
Sure. So let me tell you something that bothers me about that whole ending scene. And where I go is I always critique everything and look at it, in that light of would it really happen? And what bothers me a lot, and I think it bothers me about a lot of other stories too. I think it bothers me a lot about stories like Romeo and Juliet, and where the woman falls in love with the man.
It happens very fast. Quickly. I can agree with that.
She never gets scared of him either. So she's so in love that she walks in and this grotesque fly man is just sitting there and she's nonchalantly talking to him. She's going to go in there and tell him she is having his baby. And he is ugly, deformed, and grotesque. And I'm not going to lie to you. A person, if I walked in there, I don't care if I love you or not.
You're running away.
I'm out of there. I'm walking out, running out, probably, slamming the door behind me, trying to get out. And she is just nonchalantly there. At the very end, she's like, I can't kill you. It's a half fly, half man, half pod. It's got wires hanging from it because it's transfused with the pod that he was in. So she still can't kill it. I'm just sitting there thinking I don't understand. You just watched it regurgitate puke onto Stathis' hand and his leg, and it disintegrated into nothing, and no one is yelling. Not even Stathis, whose leg and arm
I kind of
just got mutated.
That part, okay, he should be yelling because ow. But whereas with the other people, I don't feel like in those circumstances you would be yelling. You would just be kind of I think you could toss it up to being stunned and downright shocked with fear. But yeah, he should probably be yelling considering how much pain he should be in.
I would think that having your arm and your leg disintegrated in acid is going to at least conserve an ouch. That's uncomfortable, but he just nonchalantly is watching as this just evolves in front of him, and she's, not able to kill him. She's not able to do that, which is another thing that I thought, they brought into The Fly was that whole entire love story. I'm sure that's why they took the wife out, is because they wanted to bring in a love story to it, because, sex sells. And so they brought out the wife, and they threw in this girl. So, I understand why they did it.
Yeah.
But I don't think that it should have happened so quickly. She meets him, she has a fight with her ex-boyfriend, and then she sits down on his bed and they make love, and they're in love now.
I do definitely think that they kind of and I think that's actually one of the problems with films in general. We were going to talk about at one point, we were going to talk about whether or not television and the film industry, whether or not they're comparable, whether or not television has one up over the movie industry, because there's a lot more chances for long-form storytelling. Whereas this, you have an hour and 35 minutes, and you have to build this relationship, and instead of, I guess they could have done something 1 year later, and then did that, but in this, it seems like they just met, and then a few days later, a few weeks later, if even that, there's this bond that is established that just isn't there, or shouldn't be there from a character standpoint. All the same, though, I still really, really enjoyed the speech about insect politics and the end itself, but also I really enjoyed the practical effects that were done in the film.
The effects were amazing for being a 1986 film. I was not... Even the scene where he's clipping off, or he's not clipping off, he's pulling off his nails. That was very grotesque, but it was also something I didn't expect from a 1986 film whenever I went into it.
It's David Cronenberg is pretty much known for his ugly visuals. That's kind of one of the things that people always single him out for. The show Rick and Morty, they refer to certain characters from that planet. They have an entire planet of these monstrous creatures, and they call them Cronenbergs exactly for that reason. There's something about it, and I don't think it's just for 1986 either. whenever I watch certain movies from like modern day, like even right now, they use CGI, and that's not always a bad thing. Like there's good CGI and there's bad CGI, but at times it like you can see a character that's like really like this monster, and it looks weightless. Like it looks kind of like it's not even there. Like you can tell that it's been digitally put in there. And whereas with this, it just legitimately looks like a gross monster thing, and like you can, it just feels like I don't want to touch it because it looks really slimy.
The prosthetics were really good on it.
Yeah.
The effects. It didn't look like a costume. It looked like, it could have been a disfiguration on a man fly. So that was really good. You bring up the political conversation that he had with Ronnie was her name. And he had that conversation with her, but let's play devil's advocate as I'm thinking. And like I said, generally positive idea of the movie, but if I was looking at it from a perspective of devil's advocate, what I would say is he gave that speech, told her that he was going to hurt her if she stayed, but yet then went the extra mile to go pick her up out of the abortion clinic and never hurt her, actually kind of swayed to not hurt.
Well, I think maybe you can chalk that up to, like, he could feel himself slowly changing, but he didn't know necessarily what he was going to do. Like, it was still an unpredictable anomaly for himself. Like, he didn't know. He knows that he's slowly progressing into something, but he doesn't know the extent of it, so he never knew whether or not he would actually kill her. He was just assuming he would.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Staying on that topic of abortion, I was very, very surprised to see anything from 1986 displaying abortion at all, because, it's still such a prominent topic today, and I don't want to get into that, but it's still a thing that you don't even expect to see in movies in 2017. So seeing it so early in 1986, and in the graphic way that it was actually done, it was, the doctor was down there was blood, they were saying suction, you're going to get through it, they were encouraging about it. And I didn't expect to see that from a 1986 film. That was very different. So whenever we go on to that, so thinking about what else they changed and thinking about the selling points, did you notice that too, a lot of the things that they encompassed in there were things that you wouldn't expect from what I quote unquote regularly seen in movies from that era. Smoking, that sells. Sex sells. Things like that where it's over the top and they want you to go out there and actually look at it. And I think that they changed the story a lot from the short story for those reasons, so that way they could actually sell the tickets. And you were saying that they only had a budget of $9 million to $15 million.
I think it was 15. I'm pretty sure that's what it was. Which is, like I said, it's extremely big for a film in the 80s. Like for some perspective, I'm pretty sure the Nightmare on Elm Street series, the first film, was only like $2 million. And that was about released in the same time period as The Fly. So, like, they put a lot of money into this. Like, they believed in it on some level.
And you think about it, in 1986, I don't know exactly off the top of my head how much the theater ticket prices were, but I'm guessing that they were relatively low.
Yeah, like, if you adjust for inflation, it would go...
Yeah, so what ticket prices now are... relatively expensive, $6 to $8 per ticket, if you're not going on matinee time. So what would they have been back in 1986? Maybe 75 cents to $1. I'm thinking that they're not going to have been too expensive. I can't name it off the top of my head, but if you think that the overall profit was at $60 million on the box office, that's a relatively good profit.
Yeah, but you also have to, that works for your benefit, but it also works to your detriment, because if money raises in this area, money also raises in your budget. And now that's starting to increase. Like, it's the worth of the money is going to be...
Sure, so...
Yeah.
But, it was big enough to get a sequel, which neither one of us have watched.
Like,
so
all I know about that movie is it involves a dog, and I know that's controversial, because for some reason we as people care more about dogs than each other.
It's a lot harder to watch an animal die on TV than it is to watch a human die. So, yeah, there is that. So, overall, we're thinking that we would both say that the movie is a relative positive.
Yeah, I would say it's a good film. Like, that's my standard, is like, good film.
And I'm going to go on to the record as saying for 1986 and horror, it's one of the better films that I've seen. I think that it is better than the idea of, not the idea, I shouldn't say, but the overall platform is better than Freddy or Jason or Michael Myers. For me, Not the story. Freddy was an amazing story. Freddy had an awesome backstory. But the way that they put it on to screen...
You think the execution is better?
Yes, the execution, the production values, everything else there, I think, went ahead and hit a lot harder. The acting, while Robert Englund's amazing, the acting was really good in this. Jeff Goldblum did amazing in this. The woman who played Ronnie, which I don't know off the top of my head, she was really good for the character. So I think that overall adaptation of it was just a really good, really well done.
Yeah, I think that it has, it's not free from its own share of problems. It makes a couple of mistakes, like we talked about, like the development between Goldblum's character and his love interest was kind of underdeveloped and undercooked. Like, they could have done more with that. And there's other things that they probably could have lent more time to. There's certainly some, 80s aspects that feel a little cheesy now looking back. But overall, I think of it really positively. Whenever I watched it the first time, like I said, I had a glowing reception for it. I thought it was fantastic. I went out and bought the DVD, I bought the Blu-ray, which is something I don't usually do for unless the film is special in some way. But looking back, it's definitely a good film. It just has its own share of problems, but there's still a lot of moments I'd single out as great.
Like I said, I'm going to stay on the record of, it being a relatively good movie for 1986. So I think that we're both on the side of the fence that it was a pretty okay movie, and if you haven't seen it, I know it's from 1986, but I still go ahead and recommend that you take the time out if you are a fan of the genre of horror, or even if you're not, since I am not a big fan of the horror genre, take your time out and go see it.
I'd also say it doesn't just appeal to horror fans, but also science fiction fans in general might enjoy it as well.
All right, I think that's all I have for the movie The Fly. Thanks, everybody, for joining us, and we'll see you again next time.